question is, who founded Oregon and how was it founded?
That was John Phelps. He was from Kentucky, and like a lot of people at that time, the Southern Illinois was founded first, mainly by people in Kentucky and Tennessee. But then when the Galena lead mines opened up, then a lot of them would come up here in the summer. And so John Phelps came up here from Kentucky, through Dixon, over to the Mississippi, and then up to the Galena. And then one of the times he was thinking about heading north on Rock River, but instead he went down the Pecatonica River over to where Rockford is, and then he traveled south, and there was a tent there, and he thought maybe it's an Indian, and he needed some food. So he went there, and there was William Hamilton, the son of, let's see, what was that Hamilton? There's a Hamilton that was shot by William Byrd. And so he talked to him, got some food, and he told him about Oregon, especially between Mount Morris and Oregon, and he came down here and settled a claim in 1853. Then he came back 2 years later, built a house, and 1 year after that, then he laid out the city of Oregon. So that's how he came here. Just one other interesting thing in that, he had the first ferry in 36, north of where the bridge is now. But he didn't like Yankees. They didn't trust him because the Yankees, a lot of them were peddlers that went down to the south, peddling shoes and so forth. So it was a pole ferry, and he would go within a short distance of the shore, and he had cow written on his boat, on his ferry, and he asked him to pronounce it. And if they pronounce it KL, which they did if they came from Maine or up north, then he said he wasn't running the ferry that day, so then he'd go back over to this side. So.
Did he lay claim to any other land in the area, or?
No. And what's interesting, where he built his cabin, there's a new cabin that was built here about 8 years ago, a duplicate cabin that looks just like the cabin that John Phelps built. And then the house just west of that is a frame house now that used to be a brick house. And it was a fairly nice brick house, and he built that. But behind it is the old smokehouse, the brick smokehouse, and it still stands there.
What first got you interested in the history of Oregon?
Well, I never was interested in history. As a matter of fact, Homer Keithy, and I can't use the words I told him, he passed away 5 weeks ago. He was my history teacher. Then he was later principal when I taught here. And I told him I just hated the dates. I thought they were just stupid to try to remember dates. And so I really didn't have an interest because I built houses. I was an industrial arts teacher. I was over the vocational in Dixon. And I started mowing the cemetery up here in town. They didn't have any money, so I started mowing that about 15 years ago. And then I started thinking about, well, who am I mowing over? So that's when I started about 6 years ago, getting interested in the history of Oregon.
Do you know how the Indians first used the land before the settlers got here? How this land was used?
Yeah, they had a little bit of corn, maize, but mainly they just traveled with the weather and buffalo and fished, and they used the river a lot for fishing.
What was the significance of the river? Was it travel, or was it mostly for fishing?
Travel and fishing.
Did they do trade out of the area, or were they mostly self-substantial?
Not Black Hawk, but the mound builders who were here before, and there were several mounds dug up. They would be about 3 feet high, and they buried their dead in there and so forth. And if you go to Sterling, there's a great series of mounds on the river there at Mississippi Park. And they did have a trading system, but that was before the modern Indians. And they traded down the Mississippi, and then they also traded over into Ohio.
Um, what landmarks are particularly unique to the Oregon area that you think maybe a lot of people don't know about, or something that's just really important?
The Soldiers Monument is one landmark built by Taft in 1916 during World War I, which I thought was amazing. And he'd seen the names up in the courthouse of all the soldiers that were in the Civil War. They were stenciled on the walls up on the third floor. And he saw that and thought it was impressive, but he thought he wanted to build a more permanent type of marker. So then he volunteered a year of his time to build that monument. And of course, Black Hawk statue in 1911. And a lot of people say that was not called Black Hawk statue. But after the memorial service for that statue, he said, I suppose everyone will call it Black Hawk. And he said, I'll go along with that. So, and then, of course, a marker, the Lincoln marker where Lincoln spoke, up on North 4th Street, is very significant. The present depot, Governor Loudon had a big influence on that. Before, they were just wooden depots all across the Burlington. And because he was governor and he had so many guests here, he talked them into building the brick tiled roof depot, which there were none at that time on the route.
Is that the one over near the dog park area?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then where's the soldier monument at?
That's up in the courthouse.
Oh, it's in the courthouse?
Mm-hmm.
Is it something that
In
visitors
front.
can see?
Yeah. It has, in the middle, it has a bronze statue of Liberty. And then on the right-hand side, there's an infantryman looking north as if he's longing to go back home. And then there's a cavalryman, Civil War, on the north side looking south defiantly. He's trying to pull out his sword, and so that has all the names of the 5 wars. Civil War, Mexican, Spanish-American, World War I. Oh, I missed one. 1812, the War of 1812.
Okay. So we know what, you kind of talked about how the land was used by the Indians. What importance did it have to early settlers and maybe to the foundation of Oregon as a town?
Okay, when they first came out here, they thought that the most fertile land would be where the trees were. And those were only near the groves and near the rivers and the creeks. And so that's where they first settled. But the advantage of that, there was trees there for lumber, for the burning for their cabin and so forth, to heat their cabins. But then they found out that the soil out in the prairies was very productive. And the problem was getting it broken up so they could plant. And there's one interesting story. There was a Syster who was later an attorney, very influential, became state senator. His dad told him, he said, Griswold is bringing his breaking team here. Well, he didn't know what that was. And he said, all of a sudden down the road, there's a big bunch of dust stirred up. And he said, here comes 14 oxen pulling this plow. And we have a couple of the horse, I don't know what you would call them, but they put them around their neck. They were big wooden beams to pull that plow. And we have a couple up at the Historical Society. And that's how they broke up the soil. He said that if they all pull together, they could cut a 6-inch root. If they pull together. And so oxens were the first, our first ones that really were used on the farms here, because they were so strong.
And what kind of plants did they go with? Did they do corn? Is that what...
Mainly corn at that time. Mm-hmm.
And then was it something that the town just used for themselves, or was there a lot of trading at that time as well?
Well, that's interesting too, because they had to have a way to process it in the flour. At one time, we had 3 flour mills here. One north of the piano factory, one south where that closed restaurant is now, and one across the river. So that's how they marketed their corn, turning it into flour. And I think it mostly used locally because at that time you didn't travel very far. With a horse and buggy you could go 5 to 8 miles an hour. And so your range is limited.
Yeah.
If you went to Rockford, you had to stay overnight because you couldn't get back.
Was Rockford, had it started up around the same time that Oregon was, or was it
Yes,
a little earlier?
but it was still pretty small. No, it was just a little bit after us. We were the first ones in the area. We were the only ones between Galena and Chicago. And Chicago was our size at that time. So,
what would make Rockford more an attractive area to settle than Oregon? Why did it grow to be bigger?
I really haven't gone into that. I don't know unless there was a direct route from Galena, more direct. That's a good question. I don't know.
Right. How many settlers did Oregon have at that time? How many people lived in the area? If you were to give an estimate.
At the time that Phelps founded it?
Yeah. When it was first beginning in the first,
When it was first, there was probably only 5 or 10 for about 3 or 4 years. Jenkins built the first log cabin in town down by the river. And I don't know if I have I think the 40th census, and I don't have that. There was one census that there were 225 people here, and I think that was in 1880, but I don't.
Okay,
I
so
don't have
within
that,
50 years, though, it had grown to 200, from 10 to 250 years.
Right. Mm-hmm. So they were mostly farmers at that time. And then what's amazing is some of them came here to go to to Mount Morris College, the seminary, to get a degree there. And then we had 4 or 5 attorneys. They would go up there to college, then they would go to Michigan University to get their law degree. And that time, 2 years you could get it. Same thing with a doctor. You would help a doctor out for a couple of years, and you go to school for a year, then you were a doctor. It's a little bit different than now.
Yeah, certainly. What role did the Rock River play in that growth and the explosion of people that came in? And then can you tell us a little bit about how the Rock River is still important to Oregon today?
Okay, it was very important because first of all, the French used it, the traders used it for travel. Of course, the Indians used it. And then the main thing after Phelps was for water power. In 1898 was the first electric plant here, powered by the dam. Before then, there was 4 factories, including the piano factory, including Nash's cultivator factory, and 2 others that were powered by cables. There was a large canal built around the dam, and it was divided into 4 sections at the end, and then there was a turbine in there. And then the one cable must have been 500 or 600 feet long to power the equipment in that factory.
So all the factories had to be directly linked to the dam to get their power.
Mm-hmm.
And then today, how do you see the Rock River being useful to?
Just recreational, and of course the natural beauty. When we moved up here from Indiana, it was all flat. My dad was the superintendent of the school there, and we had a small farm. Every mile there was a road, square mile, north and south, east and west. We'd never seen anything like that when I came up here. The river and the roads going, meandering through, and of course the parks. We were really in love with White Pines Park, later Black Hawk. We went down to Dixon to Lowell Park, and used to love to take the ride up to Rockford along the Rock River, just see the wildlife and so forth.
And then, do you think that the Rock River is kind of gonna keep a recreational value? Is that its biggest asset at this point in time, and into the future? Do you see that's being?
No, the only thing I can see is recreational.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time. That's all the questions we have.
Okay.